Good morning, everyone. We are in a special business meeting for the District of Squamish on Tuesday, May 2nd. Hafn Squalo increased Tlachmut plus Quihomish or Whale Milk. Welcome to the Squamish Nation Traditional Territory. The motion in front of the council to adopt the agenda. Moved by Councillor Farr, seconded by Councillor Elliott. All those in favor, opposed, motion carries. Our business is, of course, our audit report and financial statements, and I'll just maybe pass it over to Ms. Clausen to introduce this.
Good morning, Linda Clausen, Manager of Financial Operations. Before we get started today, you'll notice that you have a updated draft financial statement in blue in front of you. I just wanted to go over a few items that were updated. In note 9, it would be page 18. The bottom figure was updated for a balance. The balance is updated to take into consideration a prior period adjustment. And I'll get to that in a little bit. And it should be about page 20. It was note 10E in your old copy. However, there is no 10E in the new copy. What that was a loan guarantee for the West Coast Railway loan for $500,000. When we confirmed that, there is no loan any further, so therefore we're not the guarantor. So we removed that. Those are the changes. And before I go any further, I'd like to introduce Mr. Bill Cox, Senior Partner with BDO. He'll be presenting the audit report later today. And Paul Fripp, the Senior Manager of Assurance with BDO as well. Okay. So, without any further comments, I'd like to introduce the financial statements, the audited financial statements for 2016. These statements are consolidated. That means that they include all our subsidiary companies, the Squamish Sustainability Corporation, the Squamish Oceanside Development Corporation, and the Squamish Public Library. Oceanfront Development Corporation, sorry.
I like Oceanside too, though. It's not that great.
It might be confused with others.
Technically, it's been renamed now as well. I can't remember the numerics,
Oh,
but
that's right, yeah.
we actually,
Yeah.
it's not the official name anymore.
When you're looking through financial statements, especially audited financial statements, you'd like to see the opinion of the auditor being clean. So if you go to page 4, you'll see the opinion of the auditor is that the financial statements are fairly presented. And that's always important to us to note that there's no qualifications there at all. However, one paragraph down, you see emphasis of matter, and that is our prior period adjustment. It was found during the audit process there are a few assets in our solid waste fund that were not amortized correctly. It had to do with our landfill upgrade project back in 2010 to 2013, I believe was a time period. It was about $5 million. 2011 to 2013, and the amounts were not amortized. So as per our regulations, we need to book a prior period adjustment, and the prior period adjustment reflects about $700,000 in amortization.
So just to understand, this is something that happened in between 2010 and 2013?
That project occurred during that time period. It was brought onto the books in 2013 and 2014.
Okay.
And at that point, it should have been amortized going forward.
Okay, but we didn't catch it till this year, is that?
We didn't catch it until this year.
So we have several assets and we put them in work in progress on a multi-year project. It looks to me like the work in progress was never reflagged off to, it was taken out of work in progress, but the flag wasn't turned on to start amortizing it at completion in 2014.
That's correct.
So 700,000 in the good or 700,000 in the bad?
It's bad. It's an expense. It's an amortization expense. It's not necessarily a cash expense. It's an amortization. It
Just
reflects
scratch
the
it out a
depreciation
little
of your
farther.
assets
Yeah.
going
Okay.
forward.
Well, none of us were here.
It overstated our equity and assets.
Wasn't us.
Yeah.
I was here, Doug.
Uh-oh.
Anyways, Going forward, I'd like to go through a few of the highlights in our statements. I'll start with the consolidated statement of financial position on page 5, and I'll also, just a few highlights on page 6. I won't go through too many details. So, in the financial asset section, you can see that we've had an increase in our financial assets by about $700,000. This is mainly due to our accounts receivable, an increase in our accounts receivable. We had a grant, outstanding grant receivable that's worth about $800,000 for our UV project, and that's what's sitting in there. Also to note is that we've had an increase in our cash balances of about $14 million, which also reflects the change in the land held for sale that went to zero. Going down to our liabilities, we see a decrease in our liabilities, and there's a few things going on there, and I just want to go through them. The short-term debt was paid off for $8 million, and we see a reduction in long-term debt of about $1.5 million. Offsetting that is an increase in our accounts payable and accrued liabilities. What we have there is we have a lot of our developer deposits have increased because we're so busy in our development side. You'll see that throughout the financial statements, an increase there. And an increase in our trade AP of about $1.8 million. And that represents, the projects that are going on and the payments that have been accrued during 2016. Also to note is the provision for landfill closure costs. Typically, we see an increase in those every year. Here it's been consistent because we've reviewed our landfill provision, and we've increased the time period for landfill provision another 11 years due to the vertical expansion. So it's changed our calculation a little bit, and it's given us a little bit of a reprieve in accruing that amount. Going down to our non-financial assets. Non-financial assets include our inventories, our prepaid expenses, and our tangible capital assets. And in total, that's increased by about $9.9 million. Really what's important here is our increase in TCA, or our tangible assets, which was about $11 million. And it's our budget for this year, for 2016, was about $29 million, and we've completed about 11, so we've carried forward some of those projects into the 2017 year. And you see that will impact our revenues for the funding, and it'll, and our long-term debt. So. And that brings us to accumulated surplus of $260 million, 587,029. And I'll talk to surplus in a little bit. If you move to
Can't
the...
spend that.
Passing money. Not actually surplus.
Not as much fun as I thought it was going to be.
No. Moving on to page 6, we're looking at a consolidated statement of operations. And just a few highlights here is our revenues increased by about $1.7 million over our budget. And this is a result of some of our user fees are higher than our budget was. And that's mainly due, we see some increases in landfill fees there. And our government transfers are a little bit lower than budget, and that's related to the capital grant portion. We didn't take that into revenue because our capital expenditures weren't at our budget level, so we couldn't apply for the grant claim. Moving down to our expenses. Our expenses are $1.3 million less than the budget at $56,671 million, or $56,671,690. And basically, we're basically on budget for many of the items in our expenses category. However, in our amortization, we're slightly over budget.
Can I ask a question on that?
Yes.
Go ahead.
So the sundry interest charges, the discrepancy between the actual and The bank charges and interest charges?
Well, that's basically just our charges related to our banking fees.
Yep. Why is 26 versus 56?
It's gone down quite a bit.
It's gone down, that's a decrease, significant decrease to be.
No, it's gone up. It's higher
Yeah.
than.
Our
It's actually
expenses are higher
56.
than we anticipated,
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so,
And to be honest, it was probably just that we didn't spend enough attention budgeting it in the prior
right,
year. So some of the bank charges have gone up. We're actually meeting with our bank in
that's.
another 2 weeks to
Yeah.
talk to them about our services
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
and
that's
charges.
too much
So
for
we're
the bank
looking
charges,
to
for the amount of
renegotiate.
interest they're running off of us, it's ridiculous to have it almost double.
Yeah.
Just to be clear, there are other charges in there. Our debit machines, for instance, we have to pay surcharges on our debit machines around all our various
Have
facilities.
we thought of charging the actual to the consumer?
We have some, we have to be careful around, obviously, we don't use credit cards in most of our places, but we do use it in recreation and in some of our development areas. So some of those charges can go through. We generally, a lot of the credit card companies don't allow us to,
Our
Charge
fees
back.
are our fees, and they
Yeah.
cover all of our expenses, and this is part of it. But it is concerning that it went from last year's actual of
26.
34 basically to 56, almost 57. That's
almost a dollar.
almost double, yeah.
And the interest rate on the short-term versus long-term debt as well. I'm interested in that discrepancy. Well, not its discrepancy, but just the interest in the charges of the long-term versus short-term debt.
So interest on the.
The short term is the
Yeah,
SODC.
that's the
Yeah,
SODC.
that's the
Yeah.
SODC, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's all.
Okay,
Thank you.
okay. So that brings you down to a annual surplus, which is not the same as your budgeting surplus of 13,956,420 to a budget of 10,969,297. The difference is between your annual surplus or your budgeting surplus and your financial statement surplus. In your budgeting surplus, you consider items like borrowing in your revenue as well, or borrowing. You consider principal reductions and transfers to and from reserves. So that's not considered in a financial statement surplus.
And just for clarification, so you know that we budget to a zero accumulated surplus position. So this 10,000 actually represents the financial surplus, even in the budgeted side of the statement.
Yeah.
So the key driver there is the developer contributions. We don't budget for that. So that's a big driver in terms of the discrepancy on this statement. What Ms. Klassen's talking to is that also we didn't budget for a $10 million surplus, obviously. We draw from reserves, we have principal debt reductions, we have capital expenditures, we have a number of things that from a financial accounting perspective would not be, are treated differently for surplus here.
This is going back, I'm sorry, just the investment income. Is that also interest earned on developer money?
In the revenue side, the
Yeah.
investment income? No, this would be on our cash flow.
Yeah.
On the cash flows?
Yeah.
Do we have, where would the interest for the holdings for the other accounts, like any developer, the CAC accounts or?
So they would be attributed back to those accounts if they're subject to it. So any deposits that we held, if they're subject to interest, they would be put right to those
Okay.
interests.
But we wouldn't be
But we don't
subjecting
actually-
those to investment.
Yeah, currently, I don't believe our bylaws
Allow.
allow that, so it is something we can review, but right now, I don't believe our bylaws require.
Okay, thanks, Susan.
I believe that kind of highlights, that concludes our highlights of the financial statements. If you'd like to go further through the financial statements, you could do that. Or maybe
See
just
if
open it up for
Council-
questions or,
Do you have any more questions for clarification purposes or questions for interpretation? Let's see what we have at this point.
small,
Yeah, go ahead.
sorry, bad debts, the 42,000 versus the nothing in the actuals on page 8.
So on bad debts, we had, a few weeks ago, I believe it came to council, we had a few items that we brought to council that were bad debts and cleanups, and that's what that represents.
Okay, thank you.
Property.
Property tax items.
On topic. Great. Council, anything else? Don't see anything else? Want to go over to Mr. Cox now, or?
Sure.
Sounds good? Great.
All right, the good part.
Welcome.
No, the numbers are the important part, I'm just kidding. Thank you, so I think you have a letter from us in your package, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so what I was gonna do was mention a couple highlights out of our letter. You don't necessarily need to follow along.
Is it this one?
Yeah, the one with the
Is this one here?
picture from the, I think that's from the chief.
This one might be in here.
In the,
I think, I don't think this one.
Oh, maybe it did.
I don't think there's anything in here that needs to be closed.
well, we always go close.
We go close first.
Yeah.
Even for the manager, yeah, for the manager.
Yeah,
So
okay.
we probably need to close them, unless you have some.
No, I don't think there's anything else that needs to
Okay.
be.
All right,
Closed in
I will
there.
entertain a motion to close. Moved by Councilor Chapelle, seconded by Councilor Race. All those in favor? Opposed, motion carries.